And then as we become adults, we seem to think that playing is a waste of time. We seem to think that it's a waste of time, don't do it. And I have, over the past few years, really brought a lot of elements of play. I've tried to bring them back into my life. This Tom seems to continually keep getting moved.
You know what? I came in practice this morning and I felt the same, but I literally not moved anything in there.
You're a liar.
Maybe the seat's moving.
Well, it's not
I don't
me.
know.
No, I think what happened is, hey, everybody, welcome to Grant and Steven's conversation about this. It's funny having two drummers in a building because you're like, nah, you moved it. I know you moved it. Go watch the movie Step Brothers. Did you touch my drums? You know, you got to do this at your gigs now.
That's my favorite part. I don't know why. But it's like
I know you. Do you hear yourself? You sound like some kind of insane person. You sound crazy, man. You'll have to go watch Step Brothers clip. It's funny. Will Ferrell and who else is it?
John C. Reilly.
Yeah, and they're Step Brothers. And anyway, one of them plays drums, and it's pretty funny. What's up, everybody? What are we talking? Oh, we were talking. I think what happened at the last camp is this got moved over for one of the recording sessions.
Oh yeah.
I think we had maybe someone that was left-handed, and we put a rack tom over here.
Yeah, I think we had two rack toms for like 7 or 8 of the people playing.
Yeah. Do you know how many times I get asked, "Is that a 14-inch rack tom on my Rogers kit?"
I can't imagine.
I'm like, oh, yes, it is. You're right. It is as big as my snare. What's up, everybody? Helen, Jimmy, Pat, Sean, Paul, Bob. It's good to see you. Grant and I are just going to sit here and geek out about drums. Practical applications call. So a little bit different than the others in that I'm hoping to give you something that you can use a lot in your practice time in several different areas. So not so much take this note and put it here and here's this exercise, but more of a little bigger picture stuff. And I want to talk about creativity, and I want to talk about playing in our practice time, not just playing, like of course we sit down and play, right? But reserving enough time in your practice time to just play, to actually just play around with what you're doing. There's a great book called The Art of Play. I forget what it is. Anyway, it's a great book. Forget the name of it. It's a really good book, though. It's about play. It's about the historical use of play. Humans are very unique. We use play to discover things. And then as we become adults, we seem to think that playing is a waste of time. We seem to think that it's a waste of time. Don't do it. And I have, over the past few years, really brought a lot of elements of play. I've tried to bring them back into my life, whether we're doing like a home remodel and we're playing with elements or we're playing with colors. I try to recognize it as like, no, we're just playing here. Like it's okay. We're just playing. We're like seeing what happens, you know? And I think the more we can introduce the element of play into our drum practice time, I think the better. And I used to have some creativity exercises that I would do that were purposely just me trying to play. I would do them for about a half an hour a day. And it could be something as simple as like taking a paper clip and I'm going to make as many things out of this paper clip as I can, which immediately you're like, we can make an S. That's about it, Steven. It's like, well, maybe. So you have to sit there and for about 15 minutes, you feel dumb. And then by the 30 minutes, you're like, no, I'm into this. I gotta play some more, you know, and you're finding all the things you can make out of paperclip. And there's 1,000,001 different things we can do to play. So in our practice time, what are some things that we can do that will cause what I like to call happy little accidents? You know, to quote Bob Ross, it's happy little accident. Like things that maybe we move our hand, approach it a different way, have a little bit of a different setup, and all of a sudden it kind of opens up these new pathways of like, oh, there's this cool thing I could do. One of my best practice sessions I ever had was I forgot all my cymbals. I was in college. I forgot them up at school. I played a gig. I brought them into the practice room to keep them there, and so they weren't in my car overnight. And anyway, I left them up there, forgot them. And all I had was like 6 toms that came with this Yamaha Recording Custom. So I just set up all these toms. And I had one of the funnest practice sessions I've ever had. It was a blast just playing on toms. So let me give you a few examples of different ways that I have played. Some of them I've shown over the years, some not. They're not even really huge things. They're just setting rules around something and then playing within them. That is one of the things that we have to do, or I find it helps whenever I'm making a game out of something. To make a game has to have rules. The rules are what allow us to be more creative, because we hit the wall of a rule and we're like, wait a second, well, I can't do that, hold on. And the rules are what give us a playing field, kind of an area to play. Whether you're playing, if you're a kid, what are we playing? Kickball? Are we playing football? Are we playing hockey? Are we playing soccer? We're playing, like what game are we playing? And the games always have rules. Otherwise, you have Calvin Ball, which I'm a huge fan of Calvin and Hobbes from back in the day, and that comic strip. And they had this game Calvin Ball, and it had no rules. So every time you read the comic strip, you're like, this is insanity, which is exactly what it was. And that's exactly what your games become if you don't have enough rules. So rules are actually a good thing. They help us to become more creative. And so anytime I try to do a creative thing, I try to come up with a couple of rules that will at least give me something to go by. And that's kind of whenever I go in and play a session, you're asking like, hey, what are your influences? Why? Because that gives us kind of some parameters, kind of some rules. What kind of track are you looking for? I went into one session, they said kind of a Beatles Come Together. And it's like, got it. So I immediately go to Come Together and I'm thinking about that part and the elements. And then I'm also thinking about Ringo's playing in general and how I can, and all of a sudden I have a playing field. I have a game I'm playing. And we came up with a track they really liked. And so, so that's kind of what I'm trying to do sometimes in my practice time. And some very simple things you can do is you can limit yourself to one drum. The funnest thing to do is limit yourself just to the snare drum. And you're not going to hit anything else. And the easiest way to do this is to turn your snares off at first, because there's a ton of tones we can have. It becomes more of like a timbali at that point. So we have the tone here. Have tones that are closer to the edge. We have the tone when I hit the a rim shot, but closer to the edge. Let me do an overhead shot so you can see. Isn't that a 30 Seconds to Mars song, Close to the Edge or something? Anyway, I don't know why that came in my head. Right here. Or right here. We can do a cross stick. That's kind of a cool sound. But I also have a muted sound and an unmuted sound. And I can play the rim here. I can play it with my hand. Right? And then it's like, well, hold on, I got to figure out. Because then it's a whole, we're just going to quote songs here. It's a whole new world, right? Disney, come on. Anyway, whatever. My daughter makes me watch them all. Don't act like yours doesn't either, Grant. So we can begin to experiment, and as we learn the different sounds, we begin to see like, okay, well, hold on. How can I let go of the drumstick and make kind of that sound? But also, and then there's also this sound. That's kind of fun. Right? So literally, I'm just kind of like looking at what are the different sounds I can make. And then I may start experimenting with, let me see if I can make some kind of a groove, around this. And I think that I may have even in the last lesson played something. I came up with a samba. Right? So I take stickings I know. Then I can start moving it, and so, but then we break the rules because I was supposed to just use the snare. You see how quickly you start breaking your own rules? So that's a real simple example of branching out of our typical thinking of the snare drum and beginning to think about it more of like, what tones could I make? What sounds could I make? How can I be creative with this? Here's another one that I've done before, and I actually use this on the gig I'm on a good bit. I have reverse drum fills. All the drum fills we do go like this. Why do they all go down? They could go up. So then we have to figure out, oh, hold on. That's the sticking, right? If I'm not left-handed, how am I supposed to get to this tom? Because I'm leading with my right hand, but my left hand's in the way. So then we start working out, okay, I'm going to spend 30 minutes coming up with nothing but reverse drum fills that do that. And I use them several times. Sometimes in the set, they'll go up. I have one drum fill that I do. It follows the guitar line that goes low, high, and back low. And I think it's like, except I wind up going that way. It goes from down to up and back down, and it follows the guitar line with what's happening there. And it's those like little things. I'm like, every time I play it, I'm like, reverse fill. Nobody cares. Like, nobody knows. But I do that. And Don't Even Know Who I Am, which is a cover we do. There's a, it's in 6/8. And it's a different energy. It's such a simple drum fill, boom, ba doom. But people expect it to go up to down, and all of a sudden we flip it, strike that reverse it Willy Wonka style, and we go down up, right? So that's a very small thing where it's like, well, that's kind of a small change. Another small change is take your ride cymbal and put it over here instead of a crash cymbal. Carter Beauford has his over there, and he's got a whole different style of playing because he can play it. There's so much more he can play here now, right? Everything's so much closer. What I've been messing with lately, and if you have any thoughts on this, or you've done any creative experiments that you were like, man, this really kind of like blew me open, and I came up with some new ideas. I've been messing around with putting the left hand on the hi-hat and then playing grooves just like that, like trying to see what comes out if I just put the left hand on the hi-hat, just naturally, like what can I work out? And it's kind of fun. Getting started is the hard part, you know? So it's like, right, so that's me, where that would typically be kind of the ghosting patterns that would be happening on my snare. I'm kind of relegating like, I could do a backbeat here, and that's kind of my consistent thing. And then just see what happens with my left hand. And sometimes I'm like, okay, well, that was kind of confusing, because you stop. You're not used to doing it, so you're like, well, that was confusing. What was that? But what I found was my right hand doesn't want to do 2 and 4 a lot. It wants to delay the backbeat, which makes it kind of funky and almost gives it a zigaboo feel, which is how Zigaboo plays. Right? He plays this two-handed, sometimes right hand, sometimes left hand thing. So it gives it a little bit of a funkier feel whenever we're... Then I throw a reverse drum fill in there because I've been working on those. That's a really simple example of all I did was move a hand. And then I tried to see like, well, I wonder what happens if I do that. Another thing we could do is I don't get to play any. You see how I'm just coming up with ideas and rules, and I'm just going to kind of throw more of these out here so that hopefully the next time you sit down to practice, I think we should all have the nerdy time where it's like, okay, I'm on lesson 3, exercise number 54. Steven said I got to do this 86 times, and like that kind of stuff. And then we always need to be working on music, but I also think we need to have some time in there where it's just structured play, where we get to just kind of play with the instrument, because that's what they call it, right? Playing music. So here's another one I did for a while, and it was like, okay, I can't play any inner beats on my snare drum, only back beats. All my inner beats have to be on my hi-hat. And, we're automatically going to sound like Carter Beauford. I'm just going to warn you, because, just imagine, right? Whatever that song is. So all the inner beats, and I would start with something simple. Usually that would be on my snare. I broke the rule. I played a ghost note. And all that is, and then what happens is you can combine that with playing ghost notes too. Now it's like the best of both worlds, right? Something we can do further from there is we can continue to take that idea. Let's say you're going through the basics of groove, one that I know a lot of people going through. We can talk about, Isle brought up a really good hi-hat pattern the other day. So you can see it's not very clean, is it? So at that point, I would slow it down and be like, okay, hold up. Let me get the right hand together. Okay, what's going on here? And I would start to sort things out, and I would do it very slowly. Until I sorted those things out. I may even say, okay, cool, well, I need to come up with an exercise around this because I'm actually not very good at it. So then I would say, okay, well, I'm gonna hit the downbeats of 1 on the hi-hat. Then maybe the E of 1. And kind of work myself through an exercise like that. So we took the game that we had come up with, we hit a wall with our frustrations, and now it's like we're playing football or soccer, right? It's like that's what a coach does. Here's the play, and we can't do the play. Okay, let's take the play apart. Here's the individual components of the play, and we start practicing that. And so don't be afraid to take some things that you're coming across in your playtime and begin making exercises around them. And this is a mistake I made for a long time. Is I viewed that as like, oh, it's just me goofing around. It's me wasting time. That's me, It's not. It's like the most useful time on the drum set that you can have. I've had a hard time on this gig because at soundcheck, if I play anything that's beyond a very simple drum beat that would be in one of the songs that we play, I get one of the members saying, can't you just play our songs? And I'm like, well, nobody else is playing up here, so maybe I could just like, or like, where are you going to ever use that? And it's like, I don't know. Can you leave me alone? That's like coming up to your 6-year-old and being like, where are you ever going to use coloring? Why don't you just stop that? It's like, come on, I'm just, I'm messing around here. So I think it's fun to have some time in your practice time where we begin to play around with some ideas. And then you start beginning to combine the ideas. So one that you've seen me do is like, two sound sources playing eighth notes. So it's like. So now I've got this, maybe we could make it 3 voices. It starts sounding way more complicated. All I'm doing is 3 notes here, and I'm playing ghost notes on the hi-hat. Like, it's just the games I made up. And then I start combining the games, right? We start kind of overlapping them. And these ideas start to grow. And before you know it, you've written a part for a song that you're in a band with, right? Like, this is how we discover our voice, and this is how we discover kind of who we are on the instrument. For a long time, I had an audition one time when I was 21, I think it was, for a band that later went on to be a popular band in the indie rock scene. And we auditioned, and man, I didn't have one original idea in me. I was just regurgitating all this stuff that I had learned for these cover gigs I was doing, and that was so great. But I didn't, they were coming at me with all this original stuff, and I was freaking out because I didn't know who I was as a player. I didn't have any original ideas. And what we have to do to find those original ideas is kind of play around and mess up, and it's not going to look clean. It's not, like after I get done playing with my kids, there's like glue on the ceiling and, pillows everywhere. And, Kelly's like, are we seriously, is this how we live now? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just, I'm sorry, I'll clean up the Cheerios. We didn't mean to do it. And it can be a messy experience. And so I think it's really, really important that we allow ourselves the time to sound bad, or not bad, just to sound different, and the time to play around with some things as we're in our practice time. So let me see. I don't know if we've got anything in the chat. I actually haven't been paying attention. Bob said add a tom to the left of the hi-hats, or yep, the best review for. So yeah, you can add a tom over here. That's a fantastic idea. Another one that there's a drummer out of Atlanta, Chris Daddy Dave. He doesn't have any toms on his drum kit. He only has snare drums. Everything's a snare drum. It's pretty cool. And it's especially cool because Chris Daddy Dave is doing it, and he's an amazing drummer. Or Daru. We had Daru on here. Go look up Daru's setup. That thing is insane. Like, what is happening? I can't play that drum set. But he likes it because it makes him play differently. It makes him feel differently. It's one of the reasons why sometimes you'll see me switch to traditional grip. I actually play differently in traditional grip. I feel I do. I think differently. I don't know why that is, but maybe that's not the truth of it. But I feel like I think differently when I'm playing traditional grip. And that's the only reason I would ever go to traditional, is because I feel like I think a little bit differently there. So anyway, I wanted to encourage everyone and give you just some ideas. That's not like, here's the sheet music, go learn this. I wanted you to have some ideas so that the next time you sit down at your practice time, you can eat your vegetables, do all the stuff, obviously, that SDS requires. Yes, do that. But then also, at the end, reserve a little time for yourself to play around and begin to explore some concepts. Whenever I took a lesson from Dave King, that is all we talked about. And that was what he told me. Was he said, look, throw away all your drum books. It's great that you learned all that drum knowledge. You can play it. Good job. And he said, now just throw them away. And he said, don't open any drum books. We're just going to work on these creativity exercises so that you can begin to, what it does is it helps you to put things together that before you wouldn't have put together. So I've had a large problem in certain periods of my career where I had patches of information that I felt like I had developed a lot, but they were islands and nothing was connected. There was no bridges, nothing connected all of these ideas. So I had this playing that I could do, but only if I did it over this way in this, specific way. And so I've spent a lot of times over the years trying to figure out how to, build bridges to each of the different areas, as well as learn how to pull that out whenever I wanted to in my playing. And that was specifically what I was talking to Dave King about. And he said, this is the way to do that. We have to play. We have to give ourselves some exercises that allow us to mess around and play around, and then come out the other side with like, that's kind of cool. And you begin kind of connecting these different parts. Let's see here. Comedy is all about timing. You can't read the punchline 5 minutes later. That's right. Sean, he's like, yeah, sorry about that, Sean. I think I read your Beaufort comedy timing too late. Timing isn't exactly my strength. There's a drummer joke there, Sean. I'm going to let you come up with a punchline anyway. Pat, what's up, man?
I've got a question, particularly in the area of creativity. It's been many years now, but I still have some of it left in me. I played in a marching band through high school. And when I get creative, I find that I have a hard time breaking free of all those different drum cadences that we had to do.
Mm-hmm.
It almost sound, when I sit down with the kid, I almost sound like I'm still in a marching band. And how do you break out of that? I don't know. I'm stuck in that creativity right there.
Yeah, I had a lot of friends that I told them they majored in drum pad because they were always playing the drum pad in the hallways. And Dr. Wooten was our professor, so we had the Southern Mississippi Pride is what they called the band there. It was Pride of the South. I mean, it was massive at one time. It was a huge marching band program. We had people from all over the world come there for his orchestra as well as the marching band. And I had a lot of friends that were that way that would later transition to the drum set, but they still sounded really handsy. And I was just talking to somebody about this the other day because they said, hey, I was watching a Buddy Rich solo and I noticed he plays a ton with just his hands. And I'm like, well, yeah, because those were marching drummers the drum set was new back then. Not to mention, they didn't have the machining technology to sit there and, get a faster response. So, it was cumbersome to play that, 28-inch bass drum you use with the big band that was wide open and, and you have this foot pedal that has a piece of leather on it. That's it. It's interesting to go back and listen to them. What I would do is I would start playing them on different instruments. Like if you have these cadences, instead of playing it on the snare drum, maybe play it on the hi-hat and put a backbeat on 2 and 4. Like I think don't ignore where you came from, because that's kind of like part of who you are, right? You can tell that Carter Beauford has a little bit of marching band in him from some of the marches that he does. There are other players that you can tell they have some of that background in there. Travis Barker, he's a very good example. I mean, anybody that has ever played marching band can hear that Travis Barker, and they can watch him play. They can see that a lot of his drum fills are very rudiment drum line oriented, as well as his style of drumming. So I would do one of two things. I would try to incorporate those into my playing in different ways and stop trying to feel like, oh, that's a bad thing. I would start going, well, let me embrace this. Every time I sit down, that's kind of naturally what I play. Let me see if I can work out some cool things to do with that. Part of me finding my voice was actually accepting my voice, actually accepting some of the things that I naturally did and had an inclination to do, and not, feeling like that was a bad thing. The other thing is, when you notice yourself playing that, you can make rules and be like, okay, so this thing I learned in marching band, I'm specifically not playing that right now, and if I start playing it, I'm going to stop and try to make some different rules that keep you from going in the direction of that. To me, that's what I would do. But I think that if every time you sit down at the kit, you find yourself falling back into that style, I don't know that I would ignore that too much. I'd probably play around with it. And that would be kind of my starting point. Be like, well, let me start there and see what I can come up with. Let me move it around the drum kit. Let me see if I can, come up with a drum fill from these old cadences.
Well, it's not all bad. I mean, they make some really cool tom grooves. And one thing that I have carried over that I got from back then is I'm pretty good at accenting, because that's what made cadences really, really cool, is being able to put those accents in there, and instead of just a monotone type of thing. So anyway, I try to be positive, making lemonade out of lemons, I guess.
I think so too. And I think if you've got a whole drum cadence, just take one measure of it and challenge yourself to like, okay, this one measure of this cadence, I wonder if I could come up with a groove or a fill or a tom groove or something out of that. That becomes, Pat's style. That's like kind of Pat, part of what Pat does. You can tell Steve Gadd comes from a marching band or a marching background. You can tell he's got some of that in there. There's a ton of that playing in there. So I don't know. I think it would be fun to play around with that, see where it goes.
I'll do it.
Awesome. Helen, what's up? How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I just wanted to say that the timing of this call is really brilliant because it's making me feel a lot better about something that I've just done. I've just ordered a snare drum purely because I play on an e-kit, which is great. You can have a lot of fun on an e-kit. They're brilliant and I love it. But I've been really struggling with not being able to like create my own sound. And there's something very different, I think, to getting a sound from hitting a trigger to actually exploring like a real, I know I shouldn't say real, but like a real
an acoustic drum.
So I've treated myself to a snare drum. So not going for a full kit because I've got the e-kit, but I just felt like I really needed an acoustic drum to just, learn some sounds on and experiment with. So.
And I think it's great. You can start to learn to tune. You can start to explore instead of thinking, I just have a snare drum. Get a mallet, get some brushes, start to explore all the different tones. I've played entire gigs on just a snare drum and had a blast. You can do conga patterns. Right? There's all types of different things we can do with just a snare drum, So I think it's a great place to start. That's awesome. Now you've got the bug though, and pretty soon your husband's going to be like, "Why is this double bass drum kit sitting here, Helen? What's going on?"
Yeah, there'll
be an intervention. She's like, "It's just a start. Don't tell him." All right. What else we got? Is it John? I'm trying to. It's really small print, so I'm trying to make sure I'm not. Yeah, John, what's up, man?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
Not too bad. I was wondering if you could expand on what you meant by combining these different islands of information into something new and original, because clearly this drum school isn't like, hey, this is Steven's approach to jazz drums or just rock. It's a little bit of everything. So great. But when you have these different islands of, so for going more, let's say jazz focus might be more hand heavy than foot heavy. Other styles might be more foot heavy. What did you mean by combining these different islands? Is it sort of like taking what you're naturally good at or what you've kind of refined in different drum styles and schools of thought and put those together in something new and original? Or is it more, oh, hey, that's just like what I'm doing this and this type, but this actually transfers, the same set of skills are transferable in this type of music as it is over here?
Yeah, it could be any of a number of things. So it could be a stylistic thing. So I can play reggae, but I can't really drop into a reggae anything from, a funk groove. So it could be taking and beginning to go, okay, so I'm going to practice going from my funk into reggae. Right, it could be that. It could be a thing of I have this pocket of information as far as like, I demonstrated a couple calls ago, you know, we can take and put accents on the cymbals with 16th notes. We can roll with those. And that's kind of a more advanced way to utilize 5-stroke, 6-stroke, 7-stroke, 8, whatever, however many stroke rolls. But there was a time where I could only play those exercises. I couldn't actually do that within my playing. It was like it was separate. It's like I had this whole skill I'd worked on for a long time, but if you asked me to do it in a drum fill or a drum solo, I'd freeze up, and I'm like, it was like I could. It was like there was like when you're a kid, there's like all your friends are jumping over this creek or something, and you're like, I don't know if I can quite. I mean, I was an overweight kid, so maybe it was just me, but I'm like, I don't think I have the air time to get over there. I don't think I can. And that's how I felt with some of my playing. Like, I don't think I can make that jump over there without falling and, you know, getting my shoes all wet. My mom's going to be mad. Like, I don't think I can get over there. So there were several areas of playing. And then it's a simple thing of like, okay, well, let me purposefully sit and try to incorporate this with some of the grooves that I already know. So. So it would, and the same way I was talking about, I demonstrated, you know, keeping a straight groove here and playing ghost notes on the hi-hat. And then maybe we have another game where it's like, okay, I'm going to play this groove that I know, but I'm going to go between 3 voices. So that becomes the game. So like, this is the skill, you know, 3 notes there, but then like, oh wait, I had this game I was doing the other day where I was incorporating, instead of ghost notes, I was using, you know, those ghost notes on the hi-hat. So we start this. I try to like bring those 2 pockets of information together, and maybe I could come up with a drum fill that's a reverse drum fill. So it's like 3 different pockets of information. This thing I was doing, but then this hi-hat thing, and then the reverse drum fill. And so instead of leaving it kind of like we talk about with drum beats and drum fills, we don't often put them together. So in that transition, we have a problem, right? There was a time in my playing where I was learning a bunch of different styles. So bossa nova, songo, cha-cha, bayon, mambo, Mozambique, all these reggae, you know, all this different stuff. And so I started in my practice time to go in between those, because believe it or not, in a big band, you actually do that quite a bit. So I started going, okay, cool, let me go from funk beat number 2 into a swing pattern. Let me go from a swing pattern into a, you know, a bossa nova, you know, and so it's like, you know, you're sitting here, you know, you can swing. Now it's accessible. Now it's like, okay, we're working through it. A big one for me was, I felt like if I could learn to play jazz, I could play anything well, because jazz is kind of like, oh, that's the gold standard with drumming. And I got to where I could play jazz, but then a lot of that stuff didn't translate over to my pop playing. So the sensitivity that I played with in jazz and the expression that I had in jazz with being able to express melodies and those kinds of things, it wasn't really coming up in my pop playing. But I noticed some of my favorite players, Steve Gadd, Vinny, you know, and they could kind of straddle that fence and go both sides. And they had the sensitivity of a jazz drummer, but in a pop setting or a rock setting, where they had the switch that they could, that they could kind of turn to where instead of just being or taking that intensity of being able to really drive a swing pattern at low volumes, but also being able to do that in a rock setting. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but it's figuring out wherever you have information that's inaccessible and figuring out how we can access that better, so that it's no longer like I can play jazz, I can play bossa, I can play this linear thing, and now it's just like I'm a drummer, and you can kind of swim in between all of those and access it as you need to, which with playing games whenever you're practicing comes with mixing those games. Once you kind of master this thing, be like, cool, what if I did that and mixed it with this other thing that I was doing, and kind of went in between those two, so that there's not this barrier of a transition in between them. Does that make any more sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, especially with that idea of not just fully compartmentalizing one thing, like, okay, swings are just for this, where it can be incorporated into other things. And yeah, I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, this was my biggest issue and still is to some point with a lot of what I work on, is being able to access information whenever I need it, or play it in the way that I want to, I guess should be, my jazz sensitivities have played a huge role in the gig I'm playing right now, in being able to be a dynamic drummer, how I feel this music needs to be, because it's a very simple musical form. So how can I be a dynamic drummer? What if you were a metal drummer that could also pull over some of the dynamics of jazz, could also pull over some of the softer stuff that happens with that, you have Danny Carey with Tool, who brings in some marching stuff into Tool stuff, brings in some polyrhythms in there. Like, what if I did that in this setting, and he makes it work really, really well. So I think in between that, the rub with all that is where we find our style. I think that's where we find who we are as players. Or at least that's kind of where I found myself. So Bob, what's up, man?
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Great. Does the term Orff Schulwerk mean anything to you?
No.
Okay, it's supposedly it's the way kids are taught music these days, especially percussion. And I was reading about it. It was invented by Carl Orff in 1921, but right now it's hot, I guess. It says the 4 stages are imitation, exploration, improvisation, and composition. What he points out, though, which I found interesting, is that adults have the hardest time with the second step, which is called exploration. Can you comment on that?
No, I think that we as adults begin to put a value on our time. For me anyway, my time is worth this much, because time's the thing we can't get back, right? So I think we begin thinking as adults of, come on, you got to get a job, you got to, we got to make time for this, got to get to baseball practice, everything is to a schedule. This is a new thing with the modern age. We used to not have clocks. People would look at the sun and be like, I think it's kind of, I don't know, noonish. And they'd be like, oh, it's dark, time to go to bed, Whereas now we're putting this value on our time, trying to maximize every minute. So if we can't see the tangible result from that 20 minutes spent playing or exploring, if we can't see a tangible monetary result or something we built or something, because usually when you're playing, you're going to tear it down and put it up, like it's just play. You're just messing around. We got to clean up afterwards. And I think adults have a real hard time with that, because I think our modern society is built to, we need to be output machines. We need to, there needs to be some kind of output for that, where, a day spent exploring is really kind of a fun day. Some of the funnest times that I have on tour is landing in a new town and coming up with a plan on what's going to happen. Like, okay, so where are we? You pull up Google Maps and you're like, we're in the middle of nowhere. And then you hear from a fiddle player, they're like, yeah, but on the top of that hill, there's a caveman's footprint. And you're like, cool, let's go find that. So then you go walk off and all of a sudden, you're exploring. What productive came of that 4 hours of that day in Colorado? Not one thing, except I got a cool picture of this caveman that had put his foot on the ceiling or whatever. Got some really good views, but nothing productive came of it. I produced nothing of value for anyone, except for myself, and turns out that, that exploration phase is just really, really hard to get adults to do because they feel like I guess they feel like it's not a productive time. That's my only answer for that. I don't know. I still feel the pressure though. I'm like, oh, I didn't get anything done today. Yet I may have, explored for hours and, but I'm still left feeling like, what was my tangible result? What was my measurable result? What was the productive output that happened from that time that I put in there? So I think it's a thing that's good to talk about. And I think it's a good thing to force people out of their comfort zones and be like, hey, just play around for a while. Just play, just explore, see what you come up with. And as a teacher, it's hard to get people to do that because they think, no, I need to work on the lesson so that I can move forward in the lesson and finish the book and do the next thing. And it's like, yeah, I get it. That's kind of boring. Can we just play for a second? I agree. We need to do that. Yes, absolutely. But I don't know. I think there's some really cool innovations that happen whenever we start playing, So
it was supposedly the theory is that kids learn music the way they learn language, whereas we do a entirely different method. Our brains are wired to do it differently once we grow up.
Yeah, and I don't think kids put the pressure we do on learning. I think we teach them to do that. But kids learn pretty well if we just leave them alone and let them explore and learn. They actually learn really, really well. Some of my favorite times as a kid, I homeschooled. Some of my favorite times was going outside when my mom would have us go outside and gather leaves and stuff. And we would sit at the table and look at all this stuff we had just gathered, which was way better than a textbook. That's how I learned about spores on the back of ferns. I still remember because I had all of these ferns and I'm like, what are these crazy things, And you could pick them off. And so we, oh, those are spores and you can do this. And it's like, I learned so much just from going out and exploring and bringing stuff back and being like, here's all my stuff, that I brought. Kids are real, just go into their rooms. They love all their stuff, that they got when they're exploring or whatever. Like they keep the stuff because it reminds them of whatever. But yeah, I think we as adults just need to not adult so much sometimes and maybe just do what kids do, play a little bit, have fun.
I agree, man. Thanks.
Yeah, so.
Thanks, David.
What's up, Paul?
Yo, what's up? I'm just driving to pick up my son, but I want.
Oh, go ahead.
Paul, sorry. Which Paul? There's two Pauls.
Let's go with Paul number 1 first, and then we'll go to Paul number 2.
Am I number 1?
No, you're number 2. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Paul, what's up, man?
I'm number 1. Oh my goodness, I'm honored.
Until the other Paul starts talking, then he's number 1.
Yeah. Of course. Well, no, this really resonates because I've been playing with. I bury my beater, and I've been playing with not doing that because I noticed if I play for a couple hours with the band or on a gig, like my leg is dead, and there's a lot of tension. I think it's impacting my limb independence as well. So I've been playing with not burying the beater, some of the exercises, and so stuff's broken right now.
Yeah, it gets broken. I got a question.
It's broken bad. It's broken bad right now.
I got a question for you. Do you stuff your bass drum pretty heavily as far as like muffle it?
Not too bad. I mean, just a small little pillow.
So is there a tonal difference between not bearing the beater and bearing the beater with your kid?
A little. I think yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that I'm paying more attention to it, yeah.
Yeah. So and the more you can augment that tonal difference, the better, because you'll be able to hear it whenever you're not bearing the beater, not just feel it. You'll actually be able to hear like boom, even if you're not going to play like that all the time, even if you're going to muffle it back up with your band. For me, whenever I started not bearing the beater, I actually had to take all the muffling out because I could hear it and it would produce a different tone whenever I buried the beater. And the gig I'm on right now, when you came out in Seattle, that drum is unmuffled, that bass drum. Wow. So if I bury my beater, it's a very different sound with a 24-inch bass drum than if I don't bury my beater, you know?
Yep.
So on that gig, it's been a lot of like, get the beater off the head so that that drum can sing.
Yep. Yeah,
That's cool, man. That's cool you've been doing that.
Well, it's my independence too. You know, when you bury the beater, I would put so much weight into that. I'm just noticing that now. So I've been playing with, wow, when I'm not leaning into the bass drum, you know, it was impacting my other limbs, I think, you know, by leaning into it, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah. So Grant and I talked about that, actually. Not that we talked about you. We did after you left, but we were talking about your setup and how you play and how that may actually be impacting some of the feel of what you're doing. I think you're spot on with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause my left foot's doing weird stuff now that I've been going through some of the just bass drum 101 stuff. I'm like, why is my left foot doing that? I don't want my left foot doing that right now. So yeah.
Awesome, man.
Yeah. So shout out for playing it, but it breaks stuff, but in a good way. So
yeah, it's, you know, I guess sometimes it's good to break things. But which, speaking of the retreat, Grant and I were listening back some mixes from the first camp of this year. And there were 3 specific mixes that we're going to have remixed because they weren't right. We used a new person and it was not good. So the others turned out fine. That doesn't have to do with you, Paul, but if you were at that first drum retreat, we'll be sending out 3 different emails to 3 different people to fix those. We're always trying to fix that, but if that was you, don't worry, we'll send you a new email and get it remixed. Paul number 2. I want to talk about Austin Powers now. Who does number 2 work for? Anybody else? Nobody? Okay. What's up, man?
I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay, so it just kind of seems like the general theme of this call has been a lot about creativity. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier Dave Smith, and I've been watching the Rational Funk. I think I'm about halfway through it. But I've taken some notes. What's really caught on, and you mentioned it earlier, was like, don't be afraid to kind of goof off a little bit. So I was looking at some old, it was Gene Krupa and some Buddy Rich solos, or just not so much Buddy Rich, but the Gene Krupa thing. There was a guy tap dancing. I forget who it was, and he's doing like ding 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 ding, just like goofy ass stuff, but it's beautiful. And then I look at some of Dave Smith's stuff too, and it's just it sounds. Don't be afraid that to play something really simple, but own it. Mm-hmm. And so I've been kind of digging into that. It's helping me a lot just to try to make funny sounds. Don't be comic all the time, but make something that you can like kind of have like a witty, something witty, and then tell a little story with it. It's really valuable. The other thing that he said was try to make it like you're talking to yourself or talking to somebody else, and you can create little phrases and just play around with the time that you use them. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to add that it helps. All the stuff that you said and that Dave said, I've really been benefiting from.
Well, and that's a funny thing about Dave King is like he made that whole. If you haven't watched the series Rational Funk, it's a deep dive on drum humor. It's on YouTube. One of the premier jazz drummers out there, very serious art form, Dave King, who is one of the most not serious people you'll ever meet. He made a comedy drum series that parodies, but actually inside of these episodes is actually some pretty good advice that he makes fun of at the same time, but also he pokes fun at the whole drumming community. It's really smartly done. Like, it's very smartly done. I don't think anybody but Dave could have done it. And there's an example of somebody that's very accomplished who took a chance and was like, I'm just going to play around and make this comedy series just because I think it's funny. And it was hilarious. It still is hilarious. It's one of my favorite things that's ever come out. And but the funny thing is, while he's in there making jokes. It's actually like, no, you should, like, I'm making a joke, but yeah, go do that. Like, seriously, have some fun with it. And don't take yourself so seriously with everything. Go ahead.
Sorry to butt in, Stephen, but something those episodes, some of them are really short, like 45 seconds or something. And he's toying around with, hey, I'm kind of drinking wine in the afternoon. Who knows if he is? But he says some things, and I think to myself, gosh, when he goes back and looks at those a couple of years later, it's going to be so humiliating. But it's not, though. That's the thing that I realized, is that whatever it is, what he did, that's him at the time. And he owns it all the way, and it's helping me to try to to gain a little humility, and don't be afraid to let somebody see your true self.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just talking to my kids about that. I was telling Grant too, like I went up to Minnesota. I don't remember where in Minnesota. It's dang, big city there. Or was it Michigan? No, it was Minnesota. I don't remember. Anyway, it was up there, and it was a really ritzy part of town. It was this festival on this lake with these yachts, and next to it, over the train tracks, there was this like street festival going on that would have been your typical just like county fair, but it was in a county that they make lots of money and do lots of plastic surgery, so it was kind of a ritzy, uppity thing. After nighttime, all these kids came out. Of course, teenagers are hanging out like a Saturday night, right? All of them looked the same. Everybody was wearing exactly the same thing. I passed this group of like 8 teenage girls, and they all had an exact same outfit. I'm like, what is it? It was like clones, little mini-me's of everybody. And I went back and told the band, I was like, man, all these kids look the same. And my manager went out and came back. He's like, I see what you're saying. They all look exactly the same. And it's like, I was talking to my kids, I'm like, don't be afraid to just look like who you are, and play around with that look. Like, I wore these shoes and apparently that didn't work, like that wasn't me. Kind of forced it. But we only find that stuff through playing and through messing around and not being embarrassed, not being, I don't know. I played a lot of embarrassing things over the years, and a lot of it was captured on video, but it's like, I don't know, that's who I was at the time. Yeah, I teach a little better now, but at that time that was what you got. Sorry about that. So I think it's a really important process to go through, of just allowing yourself to explore and make mistakes and not view them all as mistakes. Maybe view them as just information, that we can use later in life. So I think, but this is a hard thing to teach. It's a hard thing to talk about in lessons, because everybody wants you to give them a book and say, okay, how can I check this off? How do you check off that you've created enough? I don't know. Like, you just have to put some time aside and go do it and have fun and change things up. And before you know it, maybe you came up with something new. So that's, and if you ever are like, oh, I don't feel creative today, just try to create something bad. I read a book on writing. And that's what she said. She's like, all these writers are trying to write something good. And when they tell me I got writer's block, she said, I don't really believe in that. And she said, I just tell them, okay, well, write something bad for me. They're like, I don't want to do that. She's like, well, you're going to anyway, so why don't you just do it? Maybe you'll find something good. She said, I guarantee if you write for an hour and write 15 pages of bad stuff, she said, I bet you're going to come out with 1 or 2 lines. And those 1 or 2 lines could be your next book. They said, but you don't know until you get through all the bad stuff. Like, just regurgitate all this bad stuff. You wrote something bad. Here's 1 or 2 lines. I'll use those tomorrow. So if you're never feeling creative, just try to play something badly, then maybe something good will come out or maybe not. Awesome. Well, that's all I got for today. We got a Q&A happening on Wednesday, don't we?
Yes. Wednesday at 12.
Awesome. Wednesday at 12, we got a Q&A happening. I got 3 more shows this week if you want to go check out the tour schedule if you're close. I think we're in Texas and a couple other places. I'm going to see the bass player for my very first punk rock band. I'm pretty excited about that. He lives in Dallas now with his family. So, but yeah, anyway, I will see everybody on Wednesday at noon, right?
Yep.
Awesome. See everybody at noon.